All right. So one of the last things we need to talk about before we move on from characteristics of life for a little bit is another category of things that a lot of people, upon first glance, may think that they're actually living things. And we're actually talking about viruses. So we'll run it through our checklist. Starting at the top, evolve. So every year you get a flu shot. Even though you had the flu shot the previous year, you get a new one because the virus changes. First of all, what is a flu shot? A flu shot is a small amount of the virus to kind of tell your body what's going to happen, or kind of to prime or train your body. You're gonna get a little bit of it, but not enough to make you sick usually. Your body then knows what this is and recognizes this is bad. So the next time it sees it, it does not have to think as long. So for example, say you're walking down the hall and everybody with a blue shirt tries to punch you in the face. It's probably not going to take a lot of punches before you start looking for people in blue shirts and actively avoiding them, or if they run at you to punch you in the face, you try to attack them. You're basically training yourself by recognizing something a little bit sooner so it can hopefully keep you from getting hurt. That's what a flu shot does. Now, a virus actually is going to be able to change so much because they can multiply so rapidly. They can actually become so different through just basic changes and basic adaptations that they are so different that maybe they have a purple shirt. So now you're looking for all these people with blue shirts trying to punch you in the face. All of a sudden this guy with the purple shirt comes up, which is a kind of shade of blue, close, but you're like, oh, this guy's cool, and then he punches you in the face and you feel stupid. So then you are looking out for all of the purple shirts. Sure enough, next year, everything's going fine, guy with the red shirt punches you in the face, you do it all over again. So you get the flu shot every year to try to prime your body. Hey, this is this season's flu strain, look out for it. So we know they can actually evolve. Genetic code. They do have a genetic code. It's not always DNA, a lot of times it's RNA, but I'll show you where it is. But they do have some genetic code in there. Grow and develop. So grow and develop is largely going to be a change in size, or kind of going from like a tadpole to a frog. You change, you get arms, you get legs. So they actually do not grow and develop. Even though it's a little blob, and a lot of times they will look like bacteria, they are not made up of cells. Homeostasis. Homeostasis is like, remember, regulating your body temperature. This is using energy to maintain balance. Viruses cannot get any energy or use any energy. They don't really have any functions that require energy, and they have no way to obtain it. So we actually knock out both of these in one swoop. They can't maintain homeostasis because they can't acquire or use energy, which they would need for homeostasis. Respond to the environment. Certain viruses, you've heard of like swine flu, avian flu, all these things. Certain viruses are initially going to attack certain things. You may have plant viruses that will not affect you at all. And response to the environment, they can actually know what to attach to. If a virus is trying to say, I can only infect plant cells, and it tries to infect a person, it basically wastes its shot almost. It wastes its DNA. It's not going to be able to affect the person. So they can respond to the environment in a way where they actually respond to what they are attaching to. Reproduce. Sometimes this one's a little bit tricky. Sometimes you say reproduce, sometimes you say replicate. But the bottom line is, a virus, there are no male or female viruses, can't reproduce sexually or asexually. The only way a virus multiplies is by using the host cell. You can take billions of viruses and put them in a pile. There is going to be no reproduction because they are not able to get to a host cell. Even if they're in close contact, they can't exchange genetic information, they can't mate, they can't do anything. So they do not reproduce. So there we go. Kind of weird. Evolve, but they have DNA, which is what we always thought was like, oh, this is the biomolecule of life. So that kind of throws people off. And they kind of seem like they have a brain because they can kind of respond to certain things. They attach to certain things. You would think, okay, well, they're thinking. They are actually kind of devising a plan on what they're going to attack. However, if you remember, since it doesn't hit all of them, they are not living. It has to hit all of them. It's the all or nothing. All right, so real quick, There are two main types of virus shapes that you're going to see. The first one is a bacteriophage. This is what you would see a lot of times in textbooks. This is going to be like, oh, that's the virus. That's what I always recognize as a virus. This is specifically to attack bacteria. Because remember, a bacteria is a living thing, hits all the categories, so a virus can actually attack a bacteria. The next type of virus is going to be like influenza. This is going to be your basic one that almost looks like a cell. It actually looks really, really similar to a bacteria. So if you see, the only difference, the big difference, is that these are so much smaller. They are so much smaller. So the scale on which they are smaller, you can see here. You have a bacteria and you have a virus. So even though they look similar, the size is what immediately sets them apart. So here is the bacteriophage on the left, influenza or some kind of regular virus on the right. They have a couple similarities. First one is they have to have their genetic info. They do not have a cell membrane or a cell wall to protect it, or a nucleus, because they're not cells. They don't have any of the cell parts. They don't have organelles. So on the left, the genetic info is going to be stored inside this diamond thing. This is called a capsid. It is basically the virus switching out a cell membrane or a cell wall for its own kind of piece. On the right, you have the capsid inside and your genetic info inside it protected. This is about where they differ. On the left, they have a sheath and a collar similar to a sword. That's the squiggly thing going down from the capsid down. They also have tail fibers. On the right, you have a lipid membrane covering it, sometimes called the envelope, and you have these things sticking out. These are called glycoproteins. This is why people really don't understand viruses, or at least they're very confused by them. They think that they are living things because we said the molecules of life. What were our molecules of life? Carbs, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. So if you have these things, you're like, oh, well, that's a living thing. Duh, it has the biomolecules, the living molecules. A rock doesn't have it, so it's not living. So now we look at our virus, and we start realizing, okay, these kind of have them also. Genetic info, that's nucleic acid. Just like DNA, RNA. The capsid, the little green diamond, actually made out of a protein. And then the membrane, the yellow one, is actually made out of a lipid. So we have these living molecules in something that we've said is not living, and that confuses people. Remember, they can't use energy, but they still need to respond to their environment. They still need to recognize things. If it is the swine flu that only affects pigs, it can't be shooting DNA or genetic info into a host cell of a human. It's wasted. It can't affect that. It's not going to work correctly. So it needs to recognize it. On the left, this is how you recognize these. These things right here, tail fibers. Tail fibers are actually going to recognize very specifically the bacteria that this thing needs to affect. They are not going to tell the virus, again, why it's confusing, because you shouldn't be telling anything, but they're not going to tell the virus to inject the DNA if the tail fibers don't recognize a bacteria specifically. On the right, they use the glycoproteins. Again, glycoproteins are going to recognize whatever the virus has hit, and if it is a cell that they're like, we can infect this, then it will inject the genetic info and infect that cell. An easy way to explain this is like a puzzle. They're not actually shapes, they're not actually like locking in, but they are bonding and recognizing on, like, they are recognizing proteins. So it's like a chemical recognition. However, just for the sake of simplification, let's say this is my glycoprotein. If it hits a bacteria, and the outside of the bacteria that makes up this outer layer has some recognition molecules on it. When this goes over here, if the outside has a little indentation like that, the protein will be able to recognize that. It's like a puzzle. It can only attach to specific things. So I've said inject a couple times. So what does that mean? Here is our cell. Now remember, DNA is the blueprints or the instructions to build everything. It is going to come into contact with the cell. And if it matches up and it recognizes, oh, that's a human cell, I can infect that, it is then going to release its genetic information. And it's going to work its way into the cell. So now there is virus DNA in this cell. The cell doesn't know that. The virus is going to trick the cell and say, here, these are the actual blueprints. Build this thing. Your DNA is actually blueprints to build the person. Yay. However, the virus DNA is not. The virus DNA is a trick. The virus DNA is instructions on how to build that. A glycoprotein, and a capsid, an envelope, more glycoproteins. It's instructions to build a virus. Your cell is actually going to use its organelles, it's going to use your energy, and it is going to build a bunch of little viruses. So then you have viruses all in this cell, and they're going to start to build up, and eventually it's going to kill your cell, and they're going to burst out and infect everything, and then everything dies. So the virus's whole goal is to recognize the cell it can attach to, trick it, and make thousands of copies of itself, which are all capable of doing the exact same thing. This is why a virus can spread so quickly, because you can have one virus, and if it makes 1,000 copies, and then it busts out and it makes 1,000 more copies, that's 1,000 times 1,000. You can see how it gets exponentially worse. The last thing is, what are viruses then? They have biomolecules. They seem to kind of know what's going on, but they don't have a brain. They don't have energy. They don't even reproduce. How did they even come into existence? Literally, if you have something that has to have something to replicate, how did the first virus even come to be? If you look at the start of the universe, all right, there you go, Big Bang. At some point, Earth formed, and you had the first living thing, probably a bacteria. So here on Earth, there's the first little dude, first little bacteria. After that, you have a large spiraling off and branching off of the tree of life, and you have thousands upon thousands and thousands and thousands of species throughout time. We can trace a lot of them back. We can trace a lot of them back to very simple forms, or we can at least see how they've evolved through time. The virus, however, is kind of hard to place. There is actually a group of people, not really a group, but there's a lot of people who think that viruses didn't actually start from our first thing. They didn't actually start from our first bacteria friend over here. They believe that they came from somewhere else, and that could have been a meteorite, hit Earth carrying a bunch of viruses, and then they spread. They actually think they might be an alien. They may not be from our tree of life, and it's kind of hard for us to distinguish it. It is a little weird that they would have genetic information. Personally, I feel like genetic information and DNA and the combination of nitrogen bases and phosphates and sugars is very, very specific. It'd be weird for an alien to show up and have that. It's actually weird that we portray aliens as even looking anything like us. We are oh, the aliens came down and sucked us into their spaceship and built the pyramids. But then the explanations of aliens are oh, 2 eyes, a mouth, some arms, some legs. It's what are the odds that something from billions of light years away came over to screw with us and make some Egyptians build some ridiculous stuff, and they look like us? So, personally, I think that's all kind of a little bit of nonsense, but it is weird, and people believe it. This is what we go off of, and until somebody can trace a virus all the way back and show me what a virus evolved from, or didn't evolve from definitively, we're just going to assume that they are non-living things that we got to keep getting flu shots for, because they make us snotty and sick and feverish, but that's about it.